Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly advised. The following is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony from the trial of Sean Diddy Combs, as reported by Inner City Press. The court hadn't expected him. His name wasn't on any witness list. Even reporters were caught off guard. But when Jim Carrey walked through the courtroom doors, quiet, serious, and without his signature grin, the entire gallery fell silent. Known for his wild energy, comedic genius, and larger-than-life personas, Jim wasn't there to entertain. He was there to confess. What he revealed wasn't just unsettling, it was earth-shattering. His voice shook as he admitted he'd done things he still couldn't speak about without trembling. He said his success didn't come from talent alone, but from submission, and the man who orchestrated it all, Sean Diddy Combs. With visible unease, Carrey described candlelit rituals, ice-filled bathtubs, and rooms full of powerful Hollywood figures who stood by as he was initiated. This wasn't just testimony, it was a spiritual exorcism, and it changed everything. There were no cameras ready, no press passes waiting. But when Jim Carrey walked into that courtroom that morning, everything stopped. The man the world once adored for his rubber-faced antics, late-night pranks, and infectious laughter now looked like a shadow of himself. Clad in a long black overcoat and dark sunglasses, his expression was hollow. So hollow that even veteran reporters shifted uneasily. There were no jokes, no smiles. Just a man walking like he had come to face a monster. The air was already heavy, from the gravity of Diddy's ongoing trial, but now it felt like a storm was coming. Even the judge paused. A bailiff leaned over to whisper in the prosecutor's ear, "Jim Carrey is here to testify." The words thundered through the courtroom like a shockwave. No one saw this coming. Carrey clutched a manila folder under his arm like it held the weight of decades. His steps were slow, deliberate. Diddy turned in his chair. First, confusion. Then, something else. Recognition. Or fear. "I'm not here for revenge," Carrey said softly, removing his sunglasses as he approached the stand. "I'm here to release what I've never spoken out loud." He raised his right hand, was sworn in, and let out a long breath. For the first time in the trial, the courtroom wasn't waiting on a lawyer or a scheduled witness. It was waiting on a man who had spent a lifetime hiding behind laughter, finally, ready to tell the truth. What followed would shake the room to its foundation. "I've done things I can't even say without my voice breaking," Carrey whispered, and Sean Combs was at the center of it. You could feel the air drain from the room. No one moved. A few hands rose to mouths. One juror turned away. Carrey gripped the witness stand, knuckles white. "What I saw, what I was told to do, what I agreed to because I thought it was just part of the climb. It haunts me." The judge leaned forward, urging him to go on. What Jim Carrey said next would flood headlines around the world. But in that moment, it was simply a broken man, trembling, finally speaking the truth. The silence that held Jim Carrey captive for decades was finally broken. The tension in the courtroom didn't ease for a second. No one shifted in their seat. No one dared to interrupt. Because Jim Carrey, his face ghostly pale, his voice trembling but unwavering, had just said what Hollywood always feared he might. "I was funny, but that wasn't enough." He took everyone back to the late 1980s and early 90s. Back to when he was a struggling comic in Los Angeles, performing stand-up in any dive bar or dark corner that would have him. "I did impersonations, slapstick, anything for a laugh," he said. "I just wanted to make it, and I was told there were people who could help." That's when the invitations started. Private parties, quietly passed through intermediaries. He recalled being invited to a house in the Hollywood Hills. Someone with real influence owned it, someone he hadn't known back then. That someone was Sean Combs, Jim said. "I didn't even know who he was at the time. He was new to the music scene, but people said he was going to be big, connected in music, film, everything." Then came the offers. He said he was told that to be seen, to be seriously considered, he'd need to attend certain gatherings, meet certain people, and if asked, go along with whatever they said. At first I thought they meant networking, Carrey explained, just social stuff. But then I was told flat out, if I wanted access to certain auditions, I'd need to go through Diddy. That's when his voice cracked, and I did. I went through him. The courtroom was still, breathless. Carrey described getting a call from a manager he had been chasing for years. There was a big role on the horizon. The manager told him he was talented, funny, but others were ahead of him. Unless, of course, he made the right connection. That connection, Carrey said, led him to an encounter with Diddy. It wasn't a meeting, it wasn't business, it was something else. Then he said it. I bathed with Sean Combs to get a role. The words landed like a bomb. Even the court stenographer visibly flinched as her fingers hit the keys. Carrey described being taken to a luxury suite. Diddy was already there. He remembered everything in disturbing detail: dim lighting, candles, a tub already filled. They told me it was a cleansing ritual, that if I wanted to be taken seriously, I had to be willing to shed who I was. He looked down at the table in front of him. It was humiliating, but I did it because I thought that's what it took. The judge allowed him to continue, ruling the testimony relevant to establishing a pattern of coercion and abuse of power. Carrey clarified that there were no direct threats. It wasn't do this or else. It was do this or disappear. I was made to feel like this was the only door, and Sean Combs was the doorman. Then came the words no one would ever forget. Hollywood didn't just break me. Diddy owned me. By now, even the most skeptical in the courtroom couldn't hide their discomfort. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a performance. This was Jim Carrey, one of the most recognizable faces in the world, peeling away everything the public thought they knew. His voice was calm. His words were precise, and they cut deeper than anyone could have imagined. There was no mistaking what Jim Carrey was saying. He explained that after being brought to the suite, he was told to undress and step into the bathtub, where Diddy was already waiting. He smiled like it was normal, Jim said, voice low and shaking. This is how the great are born, he told me. You leave your old self in the water. Carrey said he froze, visibly uncomfortable. But no one in the room said a word. The assistants, the intermediaries, even a known casting agent, they all just stood there, watching, waiting. I got in, Jim whispered, because I thought it was some symbolic thing, some artist's ritual. But it wasn't. What followed felt more like an initiation than an introduction. While in the bath, Diddy began asking him personal questions about his family, his childhood fears, his emotional limits. Carrey said it felt less like a conversation and more like a psychological test, like a cult interview, he said, like they were measuring how far I'd go just to belong. And then came the final instruction. If you want the part, he said, wash my back. A ripple of gasps moved through the gallery. Some members of the press shifted in their seats, visibly disturbed. I did it, Jim confessed. I scrubbed the back of a man I barely knew, because everyone else acted like this was just another step, like this was the final test before the keys to my future were handed to me. Afterward, he was given a robe, escorted to a side room, and inside was a script for the cable guy, a bottle of champagne, and a note, welcome to the next level. Jim closed his eyes. That movie changed my life, he said. But it also broke something inside me, because now I knew. I didn't make it because I was talented. I made it because I submitted. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. What Carrey had described didn't meet the legal definition of a crime. There was no force, no threat, no explicit coercion. But everyone knew. It was something else. Something colder, more calculated, a system of psychological control. And Diddy, Jim said, wasn't just involved. He orchestrated it. Like a high priest, he said, staring at his trembling hands. Like a puppet master. He paused. I gave up my dignity for a role, and I've been trying to wash it off ever since. By now, the courtroom didn't feel like a place of law. It felt like a sanctuary of secrets. finally being spoken out loud. A theater of truth. Jim Carrey, still seated at the witness stand, looked like a man carrying the weight of hundreds of others who had been too afraid to speak. And then he leaned forward, fingers trembling, and said what everyone had been waiting to hear. The parties were worse. He described the first Diddy party he ever attended. It was 1996, a year before Liar Liar made him a household name. He received a private invitation, no address, just a driver. The only instruction, wear black. I thought it was a networking event, Jim said, but I quickly realized it wasn't. He arrived at a mansion in the Hollywood Hills. The air was thick with incense and something else, metallic, ominous. Phones were confiscated at the door. NDAs were handed out like party favors. And once you stepped inside, he said, nothing felt real anymore. He described the guests, models, directors, athletes, all wearing masks. No one used names, just nods and glances, like everyone had agreed that whatever happened inside would never be spoken of again. The house wasn't set up for a party, Jim said. It was a labyrinth. Candle-lit corridors, velvet curtains concealing smaller rooms, music looping from hidden speakers in an eerie, hypnotic rhythm. I kept waiting for the part where we'd all sit and talk about movies, he said. But instead, someone offered me a tray of pills and whispered, pick your night. He refused, but he didn't leave. I was too scared to, he admitted. I thought if I walked out, I'd never work again. Then came the part that made even the most composed courtroom observers shift uncomfortably. Jim said he saw people, both men and women, being led into rooms. Some looked thrilled, others looked terrified. I asked someone, what's going on? Jim said, and they told me, this is the second act. Jim Carrey continued, his voice steady but hollow. He recalled a moment burned into his memory, a young woman, barely 20, stumbling out of one of the rooms. She was crying, clutching her dress. No one moved to help her. No one even looked in her direction. It was like everyone had been trained to ignore suffering, Jim said quietly. Like noticing it would break the illusion. Then, with visible discomfort, he described what he saw when he entered one of the back rooms, a well-known comedian, unconscious on a couch. Surrounding him were 3 men in expensive suits and 1 woman. They were laughing, posing for photos, with his limp body, as if it were a joke. And floating through the center of it all, drifting between rooms like a specter, was Diddy. He never stayed in one place for long, Jim said. He was always watching, always checking, like he was making sure the right people were doing the wrong things. The courtroom was frozen, not a cough, not a shuffle. Then Jim said something that cut through the silence like a blade. It wasn't a party. It was a ceremony, and the cost of admission was your conscience. But he wasn't finished. His fingers gripped the edges of the witness stand like a man bracing for a fall. But the further he went, the more determined he seemed to drag the truth into the light, no matter how much it hurt. You have to understand, he said, scanning the faces of the jury. Everything I saw always led back to Diddy. Every room, every deal, every name I was told to keep quiet about, it all traced back to him. Over the years, the invites kept coming. Different houses, different cities, but the same setup, the same rules, and the same people, Jim said. Or at least, the same types. Models, executives, influencers, young actors. Usually the ones right on the edge of making it. That, he explained, was the moment they were most vulnerable. Right before you pop, he said. That's when they get you, when you still need them. He described one incident from 2001 when he brought a fellow actor to an event. He didn't name him. But you know his face, Jim said. He's in every comedy you love. That actor left halfway through the night and never came back. Years later, Jim said, he got a message from him. Thanks for not stopping me from leaving. I was about to lose my soul. And then came the part that made the courtroom lean in. There were people stationed at every level, Jim said. These weren't just parties. They were control systems. They watched. They documented. They paid close attention to who followed the rules, who pushed back, and who needed to be reminded that silence was safer than truth. Jim began naming names, agents, producers, even a studio executive who frequently appeared at Diddy's events. They weren't just guests, he said. They were scouts. Sometimes they left with tapes, sometimes with contracts. The deals weren't made in boardrooms, they were made in bedrooms. Then he shared one of the moments that haunted him the most. It was 2003, at a penthouse party Diddy hosted in New York. He saw a respected filmmaker take a young performer, barely old enough to be there, into a private lounge. "I knew that kid," Jim said. He had just landed a record deal. He looked terrified. No one stopped it. Not the staff, not the guests, not even Jim. "And I live with that," he said. "With the guilt of not stepping in." His voice cracked. "I told myself it wasn't my place. I rationalized it. I told myself it would ruin everything if I spoke up." He paused, eyes distant. "But in truth, I was just afraid." "It's not just how the world works," Jim said. "It never should have been." By now, the courtroom felt less like a trial and more like a reckoning. Jim's voice didn't waver, even as the weight of his words settled over the room like a storm cloud. "I came here to say this under oath," he said, "because I don't want to be complicit anymore. I don't want to sit in interviews smiling about Ace Ventura, pretending I didn't see the devil behind the curtain." He paused for breath. Then, without flinching, "And yes, that devil is Sean Combs." The courtroom shifted. Some attendees visibly recoiled. One juror wiped away tears. The judge called for a 5-minute recess, but Jim refused. "I want to finish," he said. "I've been quiet for too long." The prosecutor gave a solemn nod. Jim inhaled deeply. The most painful part was the silence. He looked out at the gallery, his voice low and honest. "I didn't speak up because I thought I was crazy. That's what they make you feel. Like you dreamed it. Like you misunderstood something. And if you try to talk about it, you're branded as paranoid or broken." He described years of torment, internally screaming while externally performing. Red carpets, press junkets, talk shows, after Bruce Almighty, after Eternal Sunshine, even after Yes Man. People would tell me, "You've got it all," and I'd go home and stare at the wall for hours, because I knew how I got it, and I couldn't live with that. He tried to confide in people, agents, therapists, trusted friends, but the responses were chilling. They'd say, "That's just how it is," or worse, "Don't dig that up. It's dangerous." Then came the trauma, not just psychological, but physical. I had hallucinations. I'd dream of the rooms, the parties, the bathtub. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I was still there. His mind, he said, kept trying to rewrite the memories, but it never changed. And eventually, he began to believe the lie. Maybe I consented. Maybe I chose this. Maybe I was the problem. But something shifted when he heard the testimonies of others, like Cassie Ventura, like Monique. That's when it clicked. They weren't crazy, and neither was I. We were made to feel that way. That's how the machine survives. The courtroom was frozen in breathless silence. Jim looked down, his voice cracking once more. I stayed silent because I was afraid. Afraid I'd lose everything, afraid they'd come after me, afraid no one would believe me, afraid that if I told the truth, I'd be confirming the nightmare everyone works so hard to forget. He took a beat. But I'm not afraid anymore. By this point, the room no longer resembled a courtroom. It was a confessional, a reckoning. No one rustled papers, no one whispered. They just listened to the man who once made the world laugh, now peeling back the curtain on a darkness too long ignored. Jim adjusted the mic. His hands were steady now. His voice, calm, practiced, like something he had rehearsed 1,000 times in silence. "There's a list," he said. A few gasps rippled across the gallery. "Not a physical one," he clarified. "No document, but everyone in Hollywood knows. It exists." It was an unspoken hierarchy, a shadow ledger. The ones who always showed up to the parties. The ones who never flinched when things got dark. The ones who protected Diddy because protecting him meant protecting themselves. He didn't name names yet, but his eyes said he could. He described the pattern, how you'd see the same faces at every event, the same director, the same handler, big-name actors with squeaky clean reputations, the kinds people called role models, but who always seemed to be there when the cameras weren't. They weren't just guests, Jim said. They were gatekeepers. Then finally he began naming names. He testified that on multiple occasions he saw a now Oscar-winning actor, someone celebrated for playing upright, moral heroes, attending what he called backroom initiations. He claimed a major daytime talk show host had once been present during an incident involving a young dancer who passed out and had to be carried out. No one called for help. No one even flinched, and he named a well-known music producer, a hitmaker, who often arrived with new young talent in tow. According to Jim, this producer would promise them careers. In exchange, he'd collect their silence. But it was when Jim circled back to Diddy that the courtroom turned cold. Sean Combs didn't just benefit from the system, Jim said. He built it. He looked straight at the judge, then the jury. He made the list. He didn't just move through the rooms. He controlled them. He curated the players. He curated the roles. He curated them. Jim described how Diddy would float through these gatherings, giving subtle nods, nonverbal cues that meant he's safe or she's in. These weren't just parties. These were rituals, Jim said. Moments where complicity was sealed. Then came the memory that seemed to haunt him the most. It was 2005, a state party. Upper floors were blocked off. Someone handed him a key card. VIP only, they said. He went upstairs and into something he could never unsee. The room was filled with masks, not fashion, anonymity. And there, behind the masks, were 5 faces the world would instantly recognize. Directors, A-list actors, studio heads. And at the center of them all was Diddy. Jim described how these individuals weren't just partying. They were observing, judging, watching to see who could be trusted, who could be broken, who could be used. The higher you went in that house, Jim said, the lower the morality fell. He turned to the jury again. These weren't isolated events. They were orchestrated, and Diddy was the conductor. If his earlier testimony had been trembling, almost tentative, this was different. Something in him cracked wide open. He paused. The silence stretched too long. The judge opened his mouth, ready to ask if he needed a break. But Jim leaned forward, eyes locked on some invisible point beyond the courtroom walls, and began to cry. "This is the part that took me the longest to say," he whispered, "because it sounds insane, but it's true, and I've lived with it for too long." He gripped the edge of the witness stand, knuckles white. "You don't get famous in this town without getting touched. Maybe not physically, but spiritually, emotionally, mentally." He shook his head, trying to hold himself together. "Someone has to get inside you, break something, then remake you in their image." The gallery didn't move. I thought I could avoid it, thought I could smile through it, be the funny guy, be harmless. But then came the moment, the line in the sand. When it came time to level up, to go from comic to leading man, I was told I had to pass through the fire. He looked up, tears on his cheeks. And the man who lit that fire was Sean Combs. He began listing the scars he carried, like old war wounds, panic attacks, dissociation, self-loathing. There were days on set where I'd shoot scenes, make a room laugh, then go back to my trailer and sob until I couldn't breathe. He said, "He never told anyone, because in Hollywood, weakness is a death sentence. If you admit it, you're gone, and weak people disappear in this town." Jim revealed that at one point he considered ending his life. 2007, after the number 23. "I thought I was done, not just with acting, with breathing." Then he described the moment that shattered the illusion completely. He came across a photo online, a candid shot from one of Diddy's parties. He hadn't known it was taken. In the background, barely visible, was Jim, eyes glazed, drugged, out standing next to someone I didn't even remember meeting. He paused, breathing hard. That's when I realized I wasn't living, I was surviving. The prosecution didn't interrupt. No cross-examination, no objections. No one dared break what felt like a ritual of truth, a man exercising decades of buried agony in real time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Jim Carrey said the words that echoed like a scream. "They took my laughter. They took my light," Jim said softly. And the man who held the match was sitting right there, smiling, while the rest of us burned. The courtroom remained silent, not in reverence, but in raw, stunned disbelief. Even Diddy's legal team, who had interrupted, objected, and pushed back on every prior testimony, sat motionless now. Whatever strategy they had prepared no longer mattered. Jim Carrey had hijacked the room. Not with a performance, not with charm, but with truth, so twisted, so intimate, so unforgiving, that it left no room for rebuttal. He sat up straighter. No tears now, just a grave, unnerving calm. "I don't want him to go to prison for what he did to me," Jim said, nodding in Diddy's direction. "I want him to go to prison for what he did to all of us." He described the entertainment industry as a symbiotic parasite, a machine feeding on ambition, desperation, and youth. You think they give you a career because you're talented? That's the lie. They give you the illusion of opportunity, and then they wait to see what you're willing to trade. He began listing names, not to expose, but to honor. Artists, actors, musicians, some who had once brimmed with promise, now lost to obscurity. Some couldn't do it, some tried, and broke. The ones who didn't survive weren't weak. They were human. Then came one final disturbing revelation. Jim claimed that just before the 2000 MTV Movie Awards, someone from Diddy's inner circle approached him with an invitation. It wasn't a conversation, just a message, a hotel room number, a time. "I was told to show up clean. No cologne, just vulnerability." He didn't go. The next morning, his publicist called. A major endorsement deal, one he had already shaken hands on, was suddenly gone. No explanation, just pulled. Because in this town, Sean Combs doesn't need to say the words. He just makes the call. He leaned forward, his voice now barely a whisper. "He made me do it, and I'm still paying for it." The judge asked if he had any final words. Jim looked around, then spoke. Not to the court, but to the invisible audience beyond it. To the world. To anyone watching this, to anyone who thinks I'm exaggerating or delusional, I hope you're right. I hope I'm the crazy one. A long pause. Because if I'm not, then this industry is sicker than anyone's ever dared to imagine. And with that, he stepped down. No applause, no outburst, just silence. The echo of one man's truth bounced off the courtroom walls that had, for decades, protected the powerful. As Jim Carrey walked out, no reporters rushed him. No one asked for an autograph. No one shouted his name. They just watched him walk like a man who had just survived a storm no one else could see. And somewhere behind him, Sean Combs sat in silence, because in the end, Jim Carrey hadn't come to entertain. He came to testify, and what he said will haunt Hollywood forever. He looked straight at the judge, then the jury. He made the list. He didn't just move through the rooms, he controlled them. He curated the players, he curated the roles, he curated them. Jim described how Diddy would float through these gatherings, giving subtle nods, nonverbal cues that meant he's safe or she's in. These weren't just parties, these were rituals, Jim said, moments where complicity was sealed. Then came the memory that seemed to haunt him the most.